Everyone told me cutting my father off would feel like dropping a weight. They were right. Nobody told me I'd also spend the first Christmas alone, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Even though I knew I hadn't, that's the part I want to tell you about. Not the cutoff, not the reasons. Not the story you've heard 100 times in 100 videos that all end the same way, with someone walking out of a room, closing a door, and a title card that says 2 years later, I'm happier than ever. I want to tell you about the part that comes after the door closes. The Tuesday afternoons, the grocery store moments. The first time a coworker asks if you're going home for the holidays, and your brain has to decide, in under a second, which version of yourself to be. That's where the actual story lives. And nobody films that. So this is me filming that. My name is Maren. I'm 34. I live in Belden Falls, which is a town you've never heard of and won't remember, which is exactly the kind of town I needed. I work in a small office that smells like printer ink and the kind of coffee that's been on the warmer too long. I have a friend named Tova who has known me since we were 7, and a therapist named Dr. Halverson who has the unsettling habit of waiting 45 seconds before responding to anything I say. I have a brother named Calder who I love but don't really know anymore, which is its own kind of grief. And I have, or had, a father named Roland. I cut him off 21 months ago. I'm going to tell you everything, but I'm going to tell it backwards. Because the way I used to tell this story, the way I rehearsed it in my car, in the shower, in the long, quiet hour before sleep, was always about him, about what he did, about the speeches I'd give if I ever got the chance. And I think part of what's wrong with how we talk about cutting off family is that we make it about the villain. We make it a courtroom drama. We collect evidence, we build cases, we perform our reasonableness for an imaginary jury. I did all of that for 7 years. I kept a notes app on my phone called Things, Just Things. That was the whole title. And in it, I wrote down every cruel thing my father said. Everyone. Time-stamped, date-stamped. Sometimes with a sentence underneath about what I wished I'd said back. I have entries going back to when I was 26. The first one says, October 14th, Dad told me at dinner that I look like I'm gaining weight again, and laughed when I didn't laugh. The last one I added before I deleted the whole app says June 9th, he did it again at Calder's engagement dinner, and I am done. 7 years, 341 entries. I kept them like I was building a case for a trial that was never going to happen, because there was no judge. There was just me, and the only verdict I could ever get was the one I gave myself. I want to tell you about that. But first I have to tell you about a bird. When I was 8 years old, my father gave me a ceramic bird. It was small, about the size of an egg, and it was painted a kind of dusty blue, the color of an evening sky right before it gives up and turns gray. He gave it to me on a Sunday afternoon. He came into my room, which he almost never did, because he was a man who summoned rather than entered, and he held it out to me and he said, "For your shelf, so you'll remember me when you grow up and forget us." I was 8. I didn't know what to do with a sentence like that. I just took the bird. I put it on my shelf. I kept it there for the next 26 years. I'm telling you about the bird now because the bird is going to come back. And when it does, I want you to remember what he said. So you'll remember me when you grow up and forget us. I want you to feel how that sentence sits inside a child, like a small seed of guilt planted in the dark, waiting. He was very good at sentences like that. My father, I mean. He could deliver a line that sounded like love and felt like a hand around your throat. And he could do it at the dinner table with mashed potatoes on his fork. And the rest of us would just keep eating, because that was the rule. We kept eating. There were 2 phrases he used more than any others. I want you to remember both of them, because they're going to matter later. The first one was, "I'm just being honest." He said it before every cruelty. Like a warning bell, only by the time you heard it, the cruelty was already in the air. "I'm just being honest, sweetheart. But you're never going to keep a man if you talk like that. I'm just being honest, but your brother was always the smart one. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest." The second phrase wasn't his, it was my mother's. My mother is named Lenore, and she is the kindest person I've ever met, which is also the most damaging thing I can say about her. Because her kindness was a kind of weather, it softened everything. It made everything survivable. And whenever my father said something that landed in the room like broken glass, my mother would lean over to me, sometimes immediately, sometimes hours later. And she would say, He doesn't mean it like that, Maren. That was the sentence I grew up inside. He doesn't mean it like that. It was the wallpaper of my childhood. It was the air I breathed. And I want you to remember it because she's going to say it to me one more time, and that's the moment everything I thought I knew about my mother is going to change. But not yet. We're not there yet. I want to tell you who I was before I tell you what I did. I was the daughter who called every Sunday. I was the daughter who remembered birthdays, who sent cards, who flew home for Easter, even when I couldn't afford the ticket. I was the daughter who, at 29, drove 4 hours through a snowstorm because my mother had mentioned offhandedly that the pipes had frozen and my father didn't know who to call. I was the daughter who, when my father had bypass surgery at 61, slept on a hospital chair for 3 nights, and when he woke up, the first thing he said to me was, "Where's your brother?" I am not telling you this to make you feel bad for me. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand, really understand, that I wasn't a daughter who left because it was easy. I was a daughter who stayed for 32 years. I stayed through every dinner, every holiday, every offhand comment that made me cry in the car on the way home. I stayed because I believed, and I am embarrassed to tell you how completely I believed, that if I could just be good enough, calm enough, useful enough, my father would one day see me, just once. Just see me. Just say my name out loud the way he said my brother's name. With pride, with weight, with the kind of voice you save for the people you love. I just wanted that. That's it. That's all this was ever about. There's a kind of love I think a lot of you know about. It's the love that asks you to disappear in increments. To shave off small pieces of yourself. A preference here, a boundary there, an opinion you'd been holding, so that the people who claim to love you have more room to be themselves. And the most insidious thing about that love is that it teaches you to call the shaving an act of devotion. You don't notice yourself disappearing. You notice your family seeming happier. And you think, for a long, long time, that those two things are the same. I was very good at it. I was an excellent disappearer. By 32, I could enter a room and read the temperature of my father's mood in under 3 seconds. And I could adjust my own personality to match it before he'd finished saying hello. It was a skill I was proud of, in a small way. I thought of it as emotional intelligence. It was not. It was a survival mechanism so refined it had replaced my actual personality, and I didn't know which parts of me were me anymore. That's who I was. That's the woman who walked into Calder's engagement dinner on the night of June 9th, 21 months ago, holding a wrapped bottle of champagne and a card she'd written by hand, and believing, still somehow even then, that this might be the night her father saw her. It was not. I want to tell you about that night carefully, because the temptation, when you tell this kind of story, is to rush through the inciting incident, to get to the cutoff, to get to the part where you walked out, but I want to slow it down, because what happened that night was not a single sentence. It was an entire architecture of cruelty, built in real time by a man who didn't think he was being cruel at all. The dinner was at a restaurant called Hartwell's, which was the kind of place my parents went to for what they called occasions. White tablecloths. A breadbasket that came whether you wanted it or not. A waiter named Marcus who recognized my father by name and didn't know any of the rest of us. Calder had proposed to his fiancée, Isa, 4 days earlier. She was sitting across from me. She was wearing a navy dress and a kind of nervous, hopeful smile that I recognized. It was the smile I used to wear at family dinners when I was younger. The smile that says, I am trying. Please like me. Please. I want to tell you a small thing. As my father walked past my chair to sit down at the head of the table, he touched the back of my chair. Just briefly. Just a hand on the wood. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a hello. It was almost nothing. But I felt it. And for a half second, I let myself wonder if maybe, this would be one of the good nights. One of the nights where he was warm. One of the nights where I'd drive home and tell Tova that he wasn't all bad. You know, he could be sweet sometimes. You don't know him like I do. I want to be honest with you about that half second. Because that half second is the cruelest part of the whole story. He sat down, he ordered wine for the table without asking what anyone wanted. He looked at Isa and he smiled, and he said, and I remember this exactly, because I wrote it down in the bathroom minutes later. He said, well, you've certainly punched above your weight, haven't you, Calder? The table laughed. Some of the table laughed. My mother laughed in the soft, apologetic way. She always laughed when my father said something that wasn't actually a joke. Isa laughed too, because what else was she supposed to do? She'd known the family for 2 years. She knew the rules. She had already learned to laugh. Calder did not laugh. Calder looked at his plate. And then my father turned to me. He turned to me and he raised his glass and he said, "Maren, sweetheart, you're up next. We're all waiting." Although, I'm just being honest. At this rate, I'm not sure we shouldn't lower our expectations. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. Because here's the thing about that sentence. It wasn't the worst thing he'd ever said to me. It wasn't even in the top 10. It was, in fact, a fairly standard Roland comment, delivered with a smile, packaged as a joke, with the protective phrase "I'm just being honest" tucked inside it like a knife inside a glove. But something happened to me when he said it, and I have spent 21 months trying to understand what. The closest I've come is this. For 32 years, my brain had been doing a very specific kind of work in moments like that. It had been translating. It had been taking my father's words and running them through a filter. He doesn't mean it like that. He's tired. He had a long week. He loves you. He just shows it differently. And producing a softer version of the sentence that I could swallow. It was an act of unconscious labor. It was how I'd survived. And on that night, June 9th at Hartwell's, in front of Isa's hopeful navy dress and Calder's lowered eyes, the filter broke. I heard the sentence raw. For the first time in my life, I heard exactly what my father said, without any translation. And what I heard was a man telling me, in front of my future sister-in-law, that I was a disappointment. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't get up and leave. I sat there. I picked up my own glass of wine, I took a sip, I said, "That's funny, Dad." And I put the glass down, and inside me, in some quiet room I didn't know I had, a door closed. It was 20 more minutes before I excused myself to the bathroom. It was 40 more minutes before I came back. It was 6 more weeks before I wrote the email. And it was 8 more days after that before I sent it. But the door had closed at the table, with a glass of wine in my hand, while my father was already moving on to ask the waiter about the wine list, like he hadn't just said the thing he'd said. I want to stop here and tell you something I haven't told anyone except Dr. Halverson. The thing that haunted me in the days after that dinner was not what my father said. I had heard worse. I had survived worse. The thing that haunted me was the touch on the back of my chair, that half second of almost tenderness, right back before the cruelty, because what it told me was that he was capable. He was capable of being warm. He had the equipment, he had the option, and every single time for 32 years, he had chosen the other thing. That was the part I couldn't unsee. Not the meanness, the choice. I drove home that night. Tova called me. She always called on family dinner nights, like a friend who knows the weather report. I told her what he said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And then to Tova, who has known me since we were 7, who has watched me come back from every family dinner a little smaller than I was when I went in, Tova said very quietly, "Maren, how long are you going to keep doing this?" I want to tell you what I said back because it's important. I said, "I don't know how to stop." And she said, "You do though, you do know how. You just haven't done it yet." I cried in my car for a long time after we hung up, not because of what he'd said, because of what she'd said, because she was right. And being right, when someone has been wrong for 32 years, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a building falling down inside you. For the next 6 weeks, I drafted the email. I drafted it on my phone in line at the grocery store. I drafted it at 3 a.m. I drafted it in the parking lot at work. I wrote versions that were long and rageful, and versions that were short and surgical, and versions that were sad and pleading, and tried to give him one more chance. I had a draft folder with 41 versions of the same email by the time I was done. The one I finally sent was 3 sentences long. It said, "Dad, I love you and I am no longer willing to be in a relationship with you. I will not be responding to messages or calls, and I am asking you not to contact me. Maren." That was it. 3 sentences. 6 weeks of drafting, the shortest, hardest thing I have ever written. I sent it on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I had checked the time. I have always remembered the time, 9:47. I sent it from my kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, in a shirt I had not changed out of from the day before. I sent it, and I put the phone face down on the table, and I sat there. And I waited for the feeling everyone had told me I would have. The relief, the weightlifting, the freedom. It did not come. What came instead was a kind of quiet so loud I thought something was wrong with my ears. I want to talk to you now about the part of this story that I have not seen told. Not in any video. Not in any book. Not in any of the Reddit threads I read at 3 a.m. trying to figure out if I was a monster. I want to talk to you about the aftermath. The first thing I want to tell you about is the silence, because nobody talks about the silence. They talk about the cutoff like it's a single dramatic moment. You walk out, you slam a door, music swells, credits roll, and maybe for some people that's how it goes. But for me, the cutoff was not the door slamming. The cutoff was the 400 days that came after. And the loudest sound in those 400 days was a phone that did not ring. My father did not respond to the email for 9 days. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a rageful reply, maybe a manipulative one. Maybe, and this is the part I'm most ashamed of, maybe an apology, a real one. The kind I had been waiting for since I was 8 years old. What I got on day 9 was a single text from my mother. It said, "Your father is very hurt. He doesn't understand what he did wrong. Please call him." I did not call him. What I did instead was something I am still trying to forgive myself for. I read that text from my mother 42 times. I counted. I read it in the morning. I read it in the car. I read it in bed before I went to sleep. And every time I read it, the same sentence rose up in me like a fever. He doesn't understand what he did wrong. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. And the cruel, cruel thing I realized, sitting on my couch on a Thursday night in July, with the television on mute and the text from my mother glowing on my phone, the cruel thing I realized was that my mother was probably telling the truth. He didn't understand. He really didn't. For 32 years, I had been having a fight with a man who didn't know we were in a fight. I had been collecting receipts for a trial that was never going to happen. I had been writing a notes app called Things Full of 341 Cruelties, and the man who had committed them couldn't have named a single one if you held a gun to his head. Because in his version of the story, the version playing on the inside of his own skull, he was a loving father who'd raised a difficult daughter, and he didn't understand why she'd suddenly cut him off. That, I want to tell you, is the moment I learned something about grief I had not known before. You can grieve a person who is still alive. You can grieve the version of them that never existed. And the grief for the version that never existed is, in some ways, worse than the grief for a death. Because there's no funeral, there's no casserole, there's no card. There's just you on your couch on a Thursday night in July, mourning a father who was never coming. And the man wearing his face, the man who shared his name, is across town eating dinner, watching the news, telling anyone who'll listen that he doesn't understand what he did wrong. That was July. By August, I had stopped sleeping properly. By September, I had told my office I was taking my floating holiday in October because I needed it. By October, I had bought a small ficus for my apartment because Tova said I needed something alive to take care of. And I was scared of cats and allergic to dogs, and a plant was what was left. And then came November. I want to tell you about Thanksgiving. I had been bracing for Thanksgiving since August. That's the truth. From the moment I sent the email, the calendar had started doing a thing where every page turn felt like a countdown. Thanksgiving was the first big test. Thanksgiving was the first holiday where the absence would have a shape, where the empty chair would be a real empty chair, in a real dining room, in my parents' real house, where my mother was going to set the table for one fewer person, and someone was going to say my name, and someone was going to change the subject, and life was going to go on without me. I'd thought about going to Tova's. She had invited me. Her family is loud and chaotic and warm in a way mine never was, and I knew she would have welcomed me. I'd thought about driving to a hotel in a city I didn't know and ordering room service and pretending it was a normal Thursday. I'd thought about volunteering at a shelter because that's what people in movies do when they're alone on a holiday. Although when I called the shelter, they told me they'd been fully staffed since September and would I like to come at Christmas instead. In the end, I did none of those things. I stayed home. I made a turkey sandwich. I sat at my kitchen table. I drank coffee out of a mug Tova had given me that said the words "Good morning, sunshine" on the side, which was the kindest possible mug for that particular morning, and I waited for the grief. I want to tell you what actually happened because what happened was not what I expected. What I expected was sobbing. What I expected was a crisis. What I expected was a moment of weakness where I'd pick up the phone and call my father and undo everything I'd worked so hard to do. What I got was a Thursday. It was just a Thursday. The sun came up gray. The radiator made the small clicking sound it always makes in November. The coffee was good. The sandwich was fine. Tova texted me at 11 to say she loved me and that her uncle had already gotten into an argument with her cousin about real estate. And did I want to come over for pie around 3? No pressure. Just an offer. I sat at the table for a long time. I held the coffee cup in both hands. And I noticed something that I want you to understand because it's the closest thing I can give you to the truth of what cutting off a family member is actually like. I noticed that I was not bracing. For 32 years, every Thanksgiving had been a day-long act of bracing. Bracing for the comment, bracing for the look, bracing for the moment in the kitchen when my father would lean against the counter and say something about my life that would make my mother laugh nervously and my brother look at his shoes. Bracing was so much a part of Thanksgiving for me that I had not, until that morning, ever experienced a Thanksgiving without it. And in the absence of the bracing, there was a kind of quiet I did not have a name for. It wasn't happiness. I want to be honest with you. It wasn't joy. There was a grief run of that morning, like a low note under a piece of music. Quiet, constant, real. I was sad. I missed something I had never had. I felt the empty shape of a father I had never been given. But underneath the sadness, there was something else. Something I had not felt at a holiday in my entire adult life. There was peace. Not the loud kind. Not the cinematic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop, because you have, finally, taken off both shoes and put them in the closet and closed the door. I drank my coffee. I ate my sandwich. I went to Tova's at 3. I had pie. I came home at 8. I slept for 9 hours. It was the best Thanksgiving I had ever had. And I cried for an hour the next morning because I was not supposed to be allowed to say that. That was the first thing nobody had told me about. That peace and grief could share a body. That you could miss a person and not want them back. That you could choose your own life and still mourn the one you'd left behind. I went back to work on Monday. And on Monday, something happened that I want to tell you about. There is a woman at my office named Pen. Pen is in her late 50s. She has a desk 3 down from mine. We had been friendly for 2 years in the way coworkers are friendly. Small talk in the break room, comments about the weather, a shared roll of the eyes when the printer jammed for the 4th time on a Tuesday. Pen had never asked me about my family. I had never asked her about hers. That was the contract. On Monday after Thanksgiving, Pen stopped by my desk. She had a small foil-wrapped package in her hand. She set it down next to my keyboard and she said, "It's banana bread. I made too much. It's not a big deal." And then she paused and she looked at me, really looked at me, in a way coworkers usually don't. And she said, "I didn't see you post any family pictures this weekend." I just thought you might want some banana bread. I want you to understand, I had not told Pen anything. I had not told anyone at work anything. As far as my coworkers knew, I had a perfectly normal family and a perfectly normal Thanksgiving. And yet somehow Pen, who I barely knew, who had 3 down from me for 2 years and had never asked me a single personal question, Pen had read something in my silence on social media, and she had baked me banana bread. I held it together until she walked away. Then I went into the bathroom and I cried for 10 minutes in a stall. Because here's the thing nobody had told me. When you cut off a family member, the love of strangers becomes louder. The world fills in, not in the same shape, not in the same way, but in a way. And the people who show up are sometimes people you have known for 2 years and never really seen. Pen showed up. Tova showed up. Dr. Halverson showed up in her own quiet 45-second way. My ficus, which had no choice in the matter, showed up by being alive in my apartment when I came home at night. And slowly, over weeks I cannot describe to you in any orderly way. Because they did not happen in any orderly way, I started to understand that the absence of one person had made room for the presence of many. But I want to be honest with you. Because if I only told you that part, I would be lying. I want to tell you about December 18th. December 18th was a Wednesday. I had been doing well. I had been, by my own assessment, handling things. I had gone to my therapist. I had stocked my freezer. I had bought a small Christmas tree for my apartment, a real one, because Tova said the smell mattered. And I had hung exactly 4 ornaments on it, because I didn't own any others and I didn't want to pretend I did. On December 18th at 2:14 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I had not heard from her since the text in July, 5 months. I had thought about calling her almost every day. I had not done it. I was waiting, and I am ashamed to tell you this. I was waiting for her to choose me. For her to say one sentence, just one, that would acknowledge what had happened. That would tell me she had seen what he was and stayed, but at least seen it. I answered the phone. She said, "Maren, honey, it's almost Christmas." I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "Your father is sitting at the kitchen table. He's been sitting at the kitchen table for an hour. He won't eat. He's not himself." I said, "Mom." She said, "Maren, please. He doesn't mean it like that. He never did. You know how he is." I want you to listen carefully to what just happened in that conversation, because I almost missed it myself. My mother, my kind, soft, weather-like mother, had picked up the phone after 5 months of silence. And the first thing she had said to me, the very first thing, was the sentence she had been saying to me since I was 8 years old. "He doesn't mean it like that." It was, I realized. Sitting there on my couch in the gray December afternoon light, with my 4-ornament Christmas tree and my ficus and the cold cup of tea I'd made an hour earlier, it was the sentence I had been waiting for her to stop saying. For my whole life. I had been waiting for the version of my mother who could put down that sentence, who could pick up a different one, who could say, even once, "Maren, I see what he is. I'm sorry. I should have helped you sooner." That sentence does not exist. It does not exist in my mother's vocabulary. It is not a sentence she is capable of speaking. And on December 18th, at 2:14 in the afternoon, I understood, really understood, for the first time, in a way I had not understood until that moment, that my mother was not going to choose me. Not because she didn't love me. She loved me. She loves me. But because she had chosen him so many decades ago that the choosing had become her bones. And you cannot ask a woman to break her own bones no matter how much she loves you. I said, "Mom, I have to go." She said, "Maren, please, it's Christmas." I said, "I know." And I hung up, and then I sat on my couch and I shook for a long time. Not crying exactly, just shaking. The way your body does when something has happened that is too big for your body to hold. I want to tell you what I did next. Because what I did next was the worst thing I did in the entire 21 months since I cut my father off, and I think you deserve to know about it. I went to my kitchen table. I picked up my phone. I opened a text message to my father. I typed 3 sentences. I do not remember exactly what they said. I deleted them. I deleted them. I deleted them. But I remember the shape of them. They were an opening. They were a hand extended back across the silence. They were a small, soft, "what if," dressed up as an adult sentence. I stared at the text for 40 minutes. I want to tell you everything I felt in those 40 minutes, because I think this is the part of the aftermath that nobody films. Oh, I felt the pull. I felt every Christmas of my childhood. I felt the ceramic bird on my shelf. I felt the half-second touch on the back of my chair at Hartwell's. I felt the smell of my mother's kitchen on a December afternoon and the sound of my father's chair scraping back from the dinner table. And every Sunday I had ever called home just to hear someone say my name. I felt all of it, and I felt how easy it would be to send, how 3 sentences could undo 6 months of work, how my whole body wanted to send it, because my whole body had been trained for 34 years to mistake the absence of cruelty for the presence of love. And the moment I let down my guard, the training came roaring back. I did not send the text, I deleted it. And then I called Tova and I told her what I had almost done. And Tova came over with a frozen pizza and a bottle of wine, and she sat on my couch with me, and she did not say a single wise thing. She just sat there. Which was, I have come to believe, the wisest thing she could have done. I almost called my father on December 18th. I want you to know that. I want you to know that the people in these videos who tell you they never wavered are lying or have not yet been honest with themselves. I wavered. I wavered hard. And I did not send the text not because I was strong, but because I was tired. Because I had done the math so many times that even in my weakest moment, the answer was the same. The version of him I wanted was not a version that existed, and sending the text would not bring him into being. It would only bring back the man who had been making me small for 32 years, and I did not have it in me to do that to myself again. Not even on Christmas. Tova left at midnight. I went to bed, and I want to tell you something strange. I want to tell you that I slept. Not well, but I slept. And in the morning, on December 19th, I went to work, and Penn left a small box of clementines on my desk with no note, and the week kept moving forward, the way weeks do, whether you want them to or not. I want to tell you about Christmas morning, because Christmas morning is the moment this story turns, and I want to do it slowly. Because I waited a long time to understand what happened, and I want you to have a chance to feel it the way I did. Christmas morning, I woke up at 7:14. I remember the time because I looked at my phone immediately, out of habit, out of the old Christmas habit of checking for messages. There were 3 messages. One from Tova saying, "Merry Christmas, you beautiful idiot. Come over whenever, no pressure." One from Calder, who I had not heard from in 4 months because he didn't know what to say, and so he had said nothing. Calder had texted me at 6:48 a.m., and his message said, "Hey, Merry Christmas, I love you. I'm not very good at this, but I love you, I should have called." The 3rd message was from a number I didn't recognize, and it said, "Wrong number, sorry." I read Calder's message 3 times. I did not cry. I felt something move in my chest that wasn't crying. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of a person in another house, in another life, deciding to reach across a silence that wasn't his to fix. He was reaching anyway. I got out of bed. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. The light was gray. The radiator clicked. My 4-ornament Christmas tree looked at me with the dignified, slightly embarrassed expression that small things have when they are trying to be enough. I want you to picture me here, because this is the image I want you to carry from this story. A woman in her 30s in a small apartment in a town nobody has heard of, sitting at a kitchen table on Christmas morning, holding a coffee cup with both hands, looking at a phone that was not going to ring with the calls she'd grown up expecting on Christmas morning. There was no father calling to make a comment about her life. There was no mother calling to soften the comment. There was nobody making her smaller for 9 in the morning. There was just her. And a coffee, and the gray light. I sat there for a long time, and then I did something I had not planned to do. I got up, I went to the closet in my bedroom. I pulled out a moving box from the back. A box I had not opened since I'd moved into the apartment 2 years earlier. The box was labeled in my own handwriting, in black marker, "Misk Old Room." I dragged the box into the living room. I sat on the floor next to it. I opened it. And on top of the box, on top of everything else, wrapped in a piece of brown tissue paper, I had wrapped it in myself when I was 22, and moving out of my parents' house, was the ceramic bird. I want to tell you that I gasped when I saw it. I did not gasp, I just looked at it, the dusty blue, the egg-shaped body. The small chip on the tail where I had dropped it when I was 12, that my father had been quietly furious about for an entire afternoon, and that I had cried over in my room with the door closed. I picked it up. I held it in my palm. It was lighter than I remembered. And I sat on my floor on Christmas morning, holding a ceramic bird my father had given me when I was 8 years old, with the sentence still attached to it after 26 years. "So you'll remember me when you grow up and forget us." And I understood something. I had not forgotten him. I had not, in 26 years, gone a single day without remembering him. I had remembered him on every birthday. I had remembered him at every promotion. I had remembered him on every flight I took without him knowing where I was going. I had remembered him in every man I dated and every man I didn't date. I had remembered him when I bought my first car and when I signed the lease on this apartment and when I planted the ficus. He had been wrong about the bird, about the warning, about the assumption underneath it, that growing up and forgetting were the same thing, and that I needed an object on my shelf to keep me from becoming a stranger to him. I had grown up, and I had not forgotten him. I had simply finally decided that remembering him was not the same as letting him hurt me. I sat there on the floor with the bird in my hand for I don't know how long. The light shifted. The coffee got cold. At some point, I noticed I was smiling. A small smile, a tired smile, an honest smile. I was going to keep the bird. I decided that on the floor. I was going to put it on the shelf in my living room, not because my father had given it to me, because I had carried it through every move of my adult life, and I had been the one to wrap it in tissue paper, and I had been the one to remember it on a Christmas morning when nobody was making me. The bird was mine. It had been mine for a long time. I had just been calling it his, and then I noticed something else. I noticed that I was thinking in the back of my mind in a voice I almost did not catch. "I'm just being honest. This is enough. This is enough. This is enough. I'm just being honest. I want you to remember that phrase, because it was my father's phrase. It was the bell he rang before every cruelty. It was the sentence I had hated more than any other for 32 years. And here it was, on Christmas morning, 26 years after he'd given me a bird, sitting on the floor of an apartment he had never seen. Here it was, in my own internal voice, doing something kind. I had taken his sentence. I had taken the worst, most weaponized sentence of my childhood, and without even noticing, I had started using it on myself, to tell myself the truth. To say I am just being honest with myself, and the honest truth is that this small, quiet morning is enough. I want to tell you that I cried, but I did not cry. I laughed, out loud. In an empty apartment on a Christmas morning holding a ceramic bird, I laughed. Because it was funny. Because the universe is funny. Because the things that hurt you can become the things that save you if you live long enough and stay honest long enough. And that is the kind of cosmic small joke that I think we get exactly one of in a lifetime. I put the bird on the shelf. I made another coffee. I texted Calder back. I wrote, I love you too. We can be bad at this together. Merry Christmas. He sent back a thumbs up, which from Calder is the equivalent of a sonnet. I went to Tova's at noon. We watched a movie. We ate too much pie. I came home at 7. I slept for 10 hours. I dreamed about my father, and in the dream he was not cruel and not warm. He was just sitting in a chair, an ordinary man, looking at his hands. I woke up. I did not cry. I want to tell you about the rest. Because the story does not end on Christmas morning, even though that's the moment everything turned. The rest is just life. The rest is 21 months of small Tuesdays, of a phone that does not ring, of a notes app I deleted in February, of the first time someone asked me at a party if I was close with my family, and I said no, not really, and I did not flinch, and I did not explain, and the conversation moved on to something else, and I realized I had been waiting my whole adult life to be allowed to give that answer without explaining. The rest is Pen, who I now have lunch with every Wednesday. The rest is Tova, who is still Tova and probably always will be. The rest is Calder, who is bad at this, but who is trying, who calls me sometimes now on his lunch break, just to talk for 10 minutes about nothing. The rest is Dr. Halverson, who has not gotten any less unsettling about the 45-second pauses, but who I now understand was teaching me how to live inside a silence. The rest is the absence of my mother, which is its own grief, which I will not pretend I have made my peace with. She has called 3 more times in the 21 months. The conversations have all gone the same way. She does not understand why I am punishing him. She does not understand that I am not punishing him. I am protecting me. The distinction is invisible to her, and I have stopped trying to make it visible. I love her. I will probably always love her. And I will not be in a relationship with her either, not the way she wants, because every road back to her is a road back to him, and I have spent too much of my life on that road already. That is the part nobody films. The collateral grief. The people you lose who didn't even hurt you because they're standing too close to the people who did. I want to tell you one more thing before I let you go, because there is a stranger I want to tell you about. And I think the stranger is the closest I can come to a moral, if this story has one, which it might not. About 4 months ago, I was at a coffee shop in Belden Falls. I was sitting at a small table by the window, reading. The woman at the table next to me was on the phone. She was crying, quietly, in the way adult women cry in public, with a hand to her face and a careful eye on the room. I tried not to listen. I could not help listening. She was telling someone, a friend, I think, that she was not going home for her mother's birthday, that her mother had said something, that her brother had taken her mother's side, that she felt insane for being upset about it, that she did not know if she was doing the right thing. She hung up. She wiped her face. She tried to drink her coffee, but her hand was shaking. I do not normally talk to strangers. I am not that kind of person. But I sat there for a minute, and then I got up and I walked over to her table and I said, and I do not really know why I said this, but I said it. I said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, I overheard. I just want to tell you, you're not insane." She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. She did not say anything. I said, "It does not stop being hard. It gets quieter, but it does not stop being hard. And you are not insane." She nodded. She did not smile. She held the coffee cup with both her hands, and I recognized the way she was holding it, like she was trying to keep them warm, even though the cup was probably empty by now. I went back to my table. I read A few minutes later, I never saw her again. I want to tell you about her because I want you to know that this story is not just mine. It is hers, and it might be yours. And every time one of us holds a coffee cup with both hands on a holiday morning, in an apartment in a town nobody has heard of, we are doing something quiet and brave. And we are doing it for each other even when we don't know each other's names. I used to think peace would feel like an ending, like a door closing, like silence after a fight. Now I know peace is just the absence of a sound you didn't know you'd been bracing for your whole life. And the strangest, kindest, most surprising thing about that absence is that it does not stay empty. It fills slowly with the sound of your own life. Banana bread, Tova's pie, Calder's thumbs up, a ceramic bird on a shelf that you finally get to keep for your own reasons. A stranger in a coffee shop who needs to hear what you needed to hear 3 years ago when you were her. That's the part nobody filmed. That's why I'm filming it now. If you have ever cut off a family member, what was the hardest part nobody prepared you for? I want to know. I want to read every comment. I want this thread, this little corner of the internet, to be the place where we tell each other the things that nobody in our own families would let us say. Tell me. I'll be here. And I am finally listening.